17-year-old. Our first speaker is Maggie Rankin. The title of her presentation is The Impact of Thinking Like a Scientist on Adolescent Conceptions. The second presenter for today is Nadine Boycott, and her presentation is Actual Self, Potential Self, and Desirable Self, Defining Self-Confidence. Our third presenter for today is Avi Kaplan, and the title of his presentation is Promoting Identity Exploration in Educational Settings, a Framework for Interventions. So please welcome our first presenter.
Thank you for that introduction. And since my title is already been shared with you, I'll go ahead and get started by first acknowledging the co-authors on here. There are two graduate students who have been project, Carmen and Mary. I'll go So this is nothing surprising here. We're going to start out and talk a little bit about one study that we did recently. And so I'll give you a little background on the thinking behind the study and then what exactly we did and what we found. So this study is built around the idea that refutation texts may be helpful in helping students overcome misconceptions. And this is really based on the first idea that in order to learn a core science concept, students are going to have to first critically evaluate any misconceptions they have. They're going to have to think about what their misconception is, and then they can move forward to develop their core science concept. Refutation texts have been used successfully to help students overcome misconceptions by first of all helping them make a direct comparison between any inaccurate and accurate conceptions. Refutation texts are really great because they say explicitly, this is what you probably think is happening, and you're wrong. This is what's actually happening. So they're very clear-cut, and because they're very clear-cut, they often see that students, after reading one, can answer questions correctly. So one of the questions that we had, and that I had in thinking about this study, is whether or not students are actually altering their conception, or we've just trained them to be really good test takers. So after reading a refutation text, we tell them, this is what you think, this is what other people think, and this is what's right. And then they're really good at giving us the right answer after reading it. So Shin and Brewer's prior work suggested that students may actually create a mental representation of the evidence that they're presented with from another person's perspective. So you give me evidence, I critically, remember that part that I mentioned earlier about critically evaluating your misconceptions. I'm critically evaluating this evidence from the other person's perspective, not actually integrating it into my own conception. If this is the case, our thinking was that students may be answering test items as the other person would, but this isn't actually a demonstration of their own knowledge. So this was the thinking that led to the current study. And our main research question here was whether or not refutation texts would have the same effect on misconceptions when we explicitly ask students to answer from their own perspective or from the perspective of the scientist. So if we ask them, according to the scientist, what might happen versus after reading a refutation text. Because the evidence is pretty clear that refutation texts are helpful, we expected, first of all, that refutation texts would increase accuracy and would decrease misconceptions. But we expected with this manipulation of asking students to answer according to a scientist or themselves, we expected that the effects would be more pronounced when students answer from the scientist's perspective. Okay, so remember that we're thinking, if they're thinking about the evidence as a scientist and they're answering like a scientist. So if we ask them that explicitly, they're going to be more likely to give us correct answers. Everybody following me on this? Okay. So it's fairly simple, right? We're just asking them to answer according to the scientist. So we had 287 students, and they were randomly assigned in 3 groups. In the first group, they were in a scientist perspective group, which we asked them, according to a scientist, what will happen. And the second condition, they were in a self-perspective, so what do you think will happen? And then the third condition, they answered both. So they answered two questions, one from each perspective. We found some interesting things that unfortunately I don't have time to talk about here, but I will give a preview that some of the students in both perspectives, in fact, about a third of the students in both perspectives were willing to answer differently for self and scientist back to back. So this is an interesting thing that I won't get to talk a lot about today, but it's pretty interesting that students were comfortable with that. So again, a between subjects condition randomly assigned one of these. So we gave them a pretest at time 1, and the pretest involved 5 multiple choice questions that we used from the AAAS Project 2061 database, which you're familiar with. Useful tool. And so we used 5 items at pretest, and then 3 weeks later, they read the refutation text, randomly assigned to one of the conditions that predicted or that determined which the wordings of the questions that they answered. So they then answered 2 more items based on the refutation text. And 12 weeks later, we did a follow-up post-test with 5 more of the multiple choice questions, or 5 of the multiple choice questions for pre-test. Not expecting you to read the refutation text because most of you are here because you didn't want to take any more physics classes. But I will point out some important things here. So, and I don't have a pointer, but if we look at the final paragraph, it begins with, but this is not true. And so what it's told you is that most people who think about the situation where Jim is pushing a box, most people think that objects at rest have no energy. And they think that the box had energy while it was moving, but not once it stopped. And then the text is very explicit, this is not true. Scientists have determined that energy can never be created or destroyed. So if the box Jim pushed had motion energy while it was moving, then when it stops, that motion energy takes a different form. So what's important here is that they're being told explicitly that the object still has energy when at rest. Just to compare the sample that we were working with to a national comparison, which is data from the Project 2061 assessment tool. These are the misconceptions that were tested in each item. So answer choices aligned with these misconceptions. And you can see that our sample performed a little bit worse than the national comparison. So these kids were selecting misconceptions pretty frequently. I'll point out the one that has a 0 to 5 at the end here, because this is the one that's most interesting for our findings. And this is the misconception that objects at rest have no energy, which is explicitly stated in the refutation text, right, that this is a misconception. Okay. So 20% of the sample at pretest answered with this misconception. So if we look at their answer choices at pretest and immediate post-test, and the way that this data is presented, because we use different multiple choice items, we are actually looking at their answer choice misconception. They were looking at the percentage across all possible answer choices that they answered with misconception. And so you can see that the correct answers in immediate post-test go up. Notice that the scale is 45%, so this is still not great. There's still accuracy here is at 40% after reading the refutation text. So these were difficult items for the students. But interestingly, it does go up at immediate post-test, and we also see that for these 2 misconceptions that are labeled ending with the 10 and then the 5, the one that I pointed out, these misconceptions decrease at post-test as well. So if we look over the 12-week delay, look what happens to our correct answer choices. These actually go back. We see this learning decay that we expect. There is some persistence of the 2 misconceptions being removed. This is just to show you overall what's happening. Now we can look specifically at what's happening across conditions. And this is the proportion of accurate responses across the 3 time points for the 3 conditions, the perspective that they answered in, self, scientist, or both. And so at time point 2, we see that their accuracy goes up, and at time point 3, it's declining. This interaction that you're kind of seeing between self and scientist is not significant, but I do think this is an interesting trend with a sample of 287 students. This is interesting to think about that the science answers are more accurate at time point 2, and we see a greater decline in that slope to time point 3. I'll also point out with the way the study was designed, both conditions, we're looking at answer choices and percentage, proportion of answer choices that are correct. The kids in the both condition had more opportunities to answer incorrectly. So keep that in mind as you see that those guys are performing lower. Okay, so this is the misconception that I pointed out that's explicitly stated in the refutation text. And this is what I think is most interesting. At time point 1, everyone, of course, is functioning the same. This is the pre-test. At post-test, this is the percentage of answer choices that reflect that misconception. So see that the scientist at time point 2, kids who answered according to a scientist were much less likely to express that misconception than the kids who were answering according to themselves. And that effect persisted over a 12-week delay. So there's something interesting happening here when students answer according to a scientist versus as themselves, particularly with the misconception. So I'll summarize what I've just said there, that we do see that refutation texts increased accuracy and decreased reported misconceptions at immediate post-test, which was immediately after reading a refutation that is useful. And this is regardless of the condition, whether or not the answer is according to self or a scientist. But the effects of refutation text were more pronounced when students answered from a scientist's perspective, and explicitly, especially with regard to the misconception that was represented, not necessarily with the correct conception. So more to be done in this area, but I think this is a very interesting phenomenon that actually supports our idea initially that we thought maybe kids are thinking about these problems from the perspective of the scientists they're answering, and they're not actually telling us anything about their own conception. When they're answering, they're actually telling us about what they think we want to hear. So, okay. And I went fast. I actually have like a minute left over, so I can answer questions or go back or show you more. Yeah.
At the late post-test, were they also answering from the perspective of the design, or is that just?
They were not. So they weren't reminded of their perspective at all. And so they weren't aware that other kids weren't answering according to a scientist. The only kids who that was really salient for were the kids in the both condition, because we randomized the order that they answered to self and scientist. So it was salient that they were answering according to the scientist and what I told you to think. And it may have been that salience was a trigger for them to think, well, maybe I should answer differently, which is why we see a third of those kids answering differently for self and scientist. But there's no open ability to ask any questions to follow up to find out what they actually were thinking when they made those choices.
But on the delayed test, you did not?
No.
For any perspective at all?
No, it was just, they were just standard test bank items that addressed this misconception. Yeah.
Managed pushing spot, and so they had to make another choice. So,
So the questions were, there was transfer involved. It was not very far transfer, so things like the box was what was used in the example. Questions referred to things like a wagon, and so moving a wagon. So you're adding things like wheels, there are complicated factors there. There were some items that were more far transfer, and we haven't looked specifically at how it differed across the level of transfer for those items. But things like dropping a clay ball onto the floor and the clay ball spreads out, what's happening in that and what's happening to energy there. So yes, there was transfer involved in the items that they answered. But that transfer was similar with the immediate post-test to the delayed post-test. But similar to what would happen in the actual classroom, if they were presented with a reputation text that they needed to transfer that to the testing.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Denji Bonington. I'm an assistant professor from Lyon University. And since our thing is about self, so as a starter, I want to tell you that I actually just fly here from China. and I'm still recovering from the jet lag problem, kind of sleepy and tired. So what you are seeing the thing here, I normally consider myself a very smart, intelligent person, but right now you're not seeing the best self in me. Just kidding. Alright, so my topic, the title of my topic is called Active Self, Potential Self, and Desirable Self. Okay, so as an introduction, there's many self-confidence concepts. For example, we all know that self-confidence is very important in student learning and motivation. And many concepts have been created just because. Okay, for example, self-identity is the general sense of self, along with the beliefs and attitudes. And also we have the self-concept, is your knowledge and the beliefs about self, such as your ideas, feelings, attitudes. And then self-esteem is the global evaluation and judgment of your self-worth. And then self-efficacy is your beliefs about your capabilities to produce the desired levels of performance in a specific area. Is that confusing enough? Okay, I'm going to create another concept about ourselves. Okay. So before we start, I'm going to take a quick survey. So just quickly look at these three statements, see if you agree or disagree. All right. So the first one is the more confident a student feels, the more motivated the student will be. How many people agree? Sorry. Second one. The smarter a student believes he is, the less motivated he will be. How many people agree? Okay, all right. But number three, parents should never tell the children that they are smart, they're intelligent, or they're genius. Wow. Some people agree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Okay. All right. So what is the problem? The problem is that you can see that the concept of self-confidence has never been clearly defined. So many concepts, it's a lot of confusion there. The next one is from this quick survey, we can see mixed findings have been recorded regarding the relationship with motivation and effort. All right. So for example, the view 1, more confident, more motivation, more effort. So the relationship is positively correlated, right? If the person is more confident, then they will be more motivated. I think this view is most represented by Albert Bandura's theory. He believes the self-efficacy, the more confident the person is, and the more motivated they will be. For example, Bandura said self-efficacy beliefs play a central role in self-regulation of motivation. Through goal challenge and outcome expectation, it is partly on the basis of self-efficacy beliefs that people choose what challenges to undertake, how much energy expended in the endeavor, how long to stay in the face of obstacles and failures, and whether failures are more motivated or demoralizing. All right. So there's a second view. The second view believes the opposite. Okay, they believe more confident, less motivation, less effort. Okay, so it goes the other way. Okay. So if the person is more confident, the motivation will be declined. And this view is represented basically by Carol Drakenberg. Okay. So her theory is the mindset theory. Based on her theory, there are two mindsets. The first one is a fixed model. What's the difference? The fixed model believes that the intelligence is fixed. It's something you will always. You're either intelligent or you're stupid. Okay? So the students identify themselves as being intelligent or smart. She found that tend to be less motivated and hardworking. Right? And the growth model is the students believe that the intelligence ability is not fixed, instead it keeps growing. And students who identify themselves as being not so smart, I'm not sure I'm smart, but I'm hardworking. Okay? They tend to be more motivated. Alright? So for example, this is called directly from Carol. Okay. Alright? Praising students' abilities backfires. Praising for intelligence turns kids off for learning. When I heard a mother telling her baby that she hates chairs, I asked her to stop. right? So you can see the difference. All right, this is direct results from my talk. So why? Why would the creative students' abilities, capabilities, and the potentials and intelligence would turn them off? What is the reason? Based on Carol Black's work, is the ego. Okay, ego is the evil thing. Okay, so when students are more, fixed model, they tend to be more ego-oriented. And when a person is more ego-oriented, they will be less motivated in risk-taking and challenging tasks. They're more afraid of making mistakes, failing, or looking stupid, and they more quickly doubt their ability when they encounter difficulty, and also they more easily give up trying. Okay, so the question I'm interested in is how do we explain these two concepts views of self-confidence? And what is the definition of self-confidence? And how is self-confidence related to student motivation at work? So this finding is actually part of my dissertation work. So this is the methodology research science. I'm not going to spend too much time about methodology. The one thing I want to point out that this is more like a quantitative research user with the graphic theory. Unlike the other people who did the intervention, controlling methods, I do not do anything. I basically observe the students, collect their journals and work, and see what's happening. Alright? Okay, so study and data. And then that's the exciting part, findings. Okay? So what I find out? The first thing I found out is the key attribute of defining self-confidence is value. It's the self, valuing the self. And it depends on what the self is valued. The value can be divided into three dimensions. We don't talk about self-confidence, we do not think about what. Okay? So here, depends on the what the self is valued. The self can be divided into three types. The actual self-value, basically means how well I'm doing right now. And the desirable self-value is how well do I want to do. Okay, and then potential self-value is how well can I do. So one way is right now, and then what do I want to do, and then what can I do. So if we put these three, the first one is called AS, actual self-value, desired self-value, and potential self-value. If we put these three together, they form a triangle. So I call it a self-value triangle. So each individual alone does not necessarily determine the motivation, but it's this triangle determines the motivation. So here, for example, if this individual's actual self-value is very low, I'm not doing very well right now, but I want to do better, and I believe I can do better. So that triangle size is very large. But for example, if the same individual says, "Oh, I have very low actual self-value, but I don't even want to do better." Okay, and I don't think I can do better. So this triangle will be negative, and then that will be demotivating. So it's the same individual, depends on their actual desired self-value and potential self-value, that can affect the motivation. So the actual motivation formula I developed myself is DS minus AS. Okay, desirable self-value minus actual self-value plus potential self-value, and that's what determines motivation. It's basically the size of the triangle and also the location where it's located. That determines motivation. So next, I'm going to do a separate test, okay, see if you get that point. Okay, I'm going to ask several volunteers, just quickly read it and tell me how high is the person's desired self-value, actual self-value, potential self-value, and how high is the motivation. Okay, I'm going to read the first one. For example, I interviewed a group of students from Miss Wen's geometry class today. I asked the girls how they feel about math in general. One student said, "It's so boring. I count up seconds till the period is over." Another said, "Yeah, I agree. Math is definitely not my thing. No matter how hard I try, I just can't get it." Among all four girls I interviewed, none of them liked math. Some girls blatantly found math boring, and some just thought it was too hard. When I asked them whether they have given it a try, they always went, "No," since they did not see the point of trying. So from here, we can definitely see the girl's motivation is very what? Very low, okay? And from the actual self-value, do you think they're doing very well with the actual math? Do you think they believe they're doing well? No, right? So low actual self-value, do they want to do better? No, it's low. And do you think do they believe they can do better? No. Okay, so low GS, low AS, low PS equals low motivation. So next time we can ask one volunteer to read it. How about you? Do you mind reading?
After I received a court break for the psychology class, I felt horrible about myself and felt like a loser. I felt hopeless and depressed. I kept reasoning with myself that failure is part of our life and failure can be motivating. But that did not make me feel better at all. I felt like my life was getting out of control and I would never gain that control back. In general, I have a very low self-confidence that leads to low self-esteem. My low self-confidence leads to most of my late months in school, to my not asking questions in class, to my failing most of my courses, and to my having very few friends.
Thank you very much. This is actually, the students inside the journal. So here, look at you. How high is the student's motivation? Very low, right? Okay, what is her actual self-value? It's low. Do you think she desires to be better? No. Okay? Do you think she has low or high potential self-value? She needs to be better? That means that she does not believe she can achieve. Okay? So that leads to low motivation. Alright, so since my time is running out, I have a lot of tests to do. Alright, let's do that. So conclusion is that self-confidence is not a one-dimensional concept, and any single dimension does not determine motivation. Instead, it's the size and the location of the self-value triangle determines it. And also, I want to emphasize that beliefs of that I am intelligent and I am smart, I'm capable, does not have a negative but a positive effect on motivation. Alright, so how do my study contribute to the current study? So in terms of self-confidence, it is not the more the better. What matters is the discrepancy between what? The desired self-value and the actual self-value. Okay, so that's what matters. And as for the intelligence, it's not a minus, it's not it's not a minus. Instead, I believe it's a plus. It is okay to tell your students that you're smart. Okay? Alright, so that's all I have. Thank you very much for listening and welcome questions.
And behavior outcome. So if the kids do not really have the high value belief, the outcome lead to their perspective, and the kids eventually not motivated, and that is more important. So that's why I'm thinking, well, why not get something onto the outcome strategy, including
That's a good idea. I think I have it here. Actually, I did not get a time to explain because I was trying to how this link to other previous theories. One thing I was talking about here. Let me see. Here. That one. It's the Madura's work. It's not showing here, but it's definitely true. Outcome expectancy. That basically is what.
They are very contingent. The relationship is contingent between the behavior and the behavior outcome. It's not based on that short framework. It's the relationship very continually. It's a continual relation. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yes, we should talk. Yeah, but definitely like to discuss more.
We want to make time for questions in there, and then everyone will have time to finish this
Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Kaplan. I'll talk to you, this is not an empirical, the focus is not an empirical study, but more of a framework of project research and intervention. Colleague in the audience, as well as another colleague in NCNI who has been a graduate student to this project and just graduated months ago successfully. The title and the focus is promoting identity exploration in educational settings. What I will present is our emergent framework for interventions to identity exploration. In preparation for this, I'd like to ask everybody to think for a moment about where you are in your career. And as you think about where you are in your career, think about a dilemma you're in. Tell your dilemma to me. Take a minute. Tell your dilemma to an neighbor.
Get a job after PhD stuff. You?
Yeah, kind of. I'm trying to finish up my dissertation.
Oh.
So, I feel it's also time to start look for jobs.
Yep. Okay, we're both the same spot.
Okay.
So dissertation jobs.
Where are you from? I'm from.
South Dakota.
Oh, we're from the same division.
Oh yeah.
as well.
Yeah, 15. Are you going to the what is it? 4 o'clock?
Happy hour session.
That's
I think.
yeah,
it's
networking
like
or something. Yeah, that should be good.
Okay, now that you resolve your dilemma.
Alright.
By the way, that was my presentation. Good luck. You're engaged in a self-relevant question. We discussed it a little bit with you. If I would continue, I would perhaps engage in additional strategies in having you think about, so where is the dilemma located? Where in yourself is there attention about your career, decision-making you're trying to make, engagement and action you are undertaking? We can have perhaps a facilitated conversation where you can share, people will learn from each other's dilemmas. That would be engaging in identity exploration of the domain of career in your life. I'm going to talk to you about facilitating identity exploration as a content. I want you to think, is this academic material, so to speak? How may it be relevant to your engagement in exploring your identity question? In this presentation, I will first define what identity exploration is and why we should, why we believe we should focus on promoting different education settings. I will then describe our model of principles for promoting identity exploration in the classroom or in other settings. I will then describe a little more specifically about the approach or the framework for applying these principles in educational settings. If I have time, I will describe a few examples of interventions we conducted in which we applied these principles. So, identity exploration is a central concept in the identity formation literature. We define it as a deliberate, internal, or external process or action whereby the person is seeking and processing information in relation to the self, with the outcome being the creation of self-relevant meaning about the content they're dealing with an integrated effect. There's a positive integrated effect on the self-system. Broadly speaking, it's engaging in questioning identifications at one hand. So for example, we talk about self-confidence, perception of myself in math. I'm not good at math. That's an identification. It's a self-perception commitment that the person made, and identity exploration will be creating an experience. Identity exploration will be creating an experience where a person will question that and re-examine it. Creating an experience where it will be challenged and promoting a constructive re-evaluation of that perception. Another example may be if I have an experience of imagining myself as a scientist, think about a particular problem from a scientist's perspective, or for myself, which is a kid, what would be that identification? I'm a kid, right? And I think about this problem, scientific problem as a kid, or I think about this scientific problem as a scientist. Wait a minute, so what does it mean to who I am and who I want to be? Because I think about these problems differently as a scientist and as a kid. And how did it feel to think like a scientist? Engaging in such questioning and deliberations, and internally and relationally with others, is the process of forming an identity. Other ways of forming an identity. This process of forming an identity is active, constructive. The identity that is formed, new commitments that are formed, are self-constructive. And engaging in this process has been associated with many positive processes and outcomes in a variety of literatures. It is such exploration, this kind of exploration, is the core of autonomous motivation. It, as I said, it's a core process in identity formation. It is associated with cognitive flexibility, the ability to consider multiple perspectives, engage in creative thinking. It is associated with adaptive coping, with evaluating stressful situations, trying to figure out who I am in this situation, what is the situation, what would be the adaptive way of dealing with it. Should I engage with the problem? Should I change the situation? Should I change myself? Should I engage in help seeking? It is associated with constructive decision making, particularly in relation to identity-related decisions. How do I choose a major? How do I choose a career? And it's local, central in career development. In our research, we also find that when we trigger identity exploration around an academic content, what happens is that students engage in the academic content and learn it in relation to who they think they are, and do it in a much more of a meaningful way. And I'll talk about it a little bit later. So how do we facilitate identity exploration around content? How do you do it in relation to science? How do you do it in relation to math, or literature, or history? Based on motivational literature, based on identity formation literature, we came up with a set of 4 principles. These are principles because they're not prescriptive actions, but rather motivational principles to consider as one engages in thinking about how to do it in the classroom. The first one involves promoting self-relevance of the content to the self of the student. Identity exploration necessarily involves a certain aspect of the self. You focus on your beliefs, or your goals, your self-perceptions, your commitments. Fortunately, as we know, many students do not find the academic material relevant to who they are. So in that case, what we need to do is engage in some action that would create this connection between the student, or create a perception of the student that the academic content relates to some aspect of themselves. We often find recommendations that teachers need to make the material relevant to students' lives. We find it really challenging. How can the teacher who's teaching 35 kids make the material relevant to everybody? We go the other way. We ask the teachers to ask the students to make the connection. The students are really creative, making various connections, but what it does, it creates self-relevance, or a perception of self-relevance. They are doing it because they find connections to a variety of self-aspects, to their interests and hobbies, to their career aspirations, to their friends, a variety of self-relevance perceptions. Now, self-relevance perception is necessary but insufficient, because identity exploration involves questioning and examining this perception of the self. So the The next principle involves triggering this question, what we call identity exploration triggers. And we define an identity exploration trigger as a perception of a relevant difference between a current self-perception and an experience. So if we get an experience that makes the person feel, wait a minute, I thought that I'm not good at math, but suddenly I have this experience that made me question this, that's this relevant difference creates a motivational force to examine my self-perception. So once self-relevance is established, what we're trying to do is apply the principle of creating this sense of, wait a minute, something is different here. I can't just continue to hold this value, this perception, or this goal. Now, triggering identity exploration, creating this perception of difference from what the world and me in the world were like, can be destabilizing, can be threatening, can be anxiety producing. It can also be exciting. But very often it also is involves anxiety. So the third principle that needs to balance triggering this relative difference is promoting sense of safety, promoting the perception and experience that I can make mistakes, I can express uncertainty, I can engage in this environment and show vulnerabilities and examine who I am without feeling threatened. And the fourth principle, even if students perceive self-relevance of the content, have a question about their relationship with the content and in relation to their perceptions or goals or values, and feel safe to explore it, they won't necessarily know exactly how to construct it. And the fourth principle is for the teacher, the educator, to scaffold identity expression strategies. So these four principles need to work in tandem to promote adaptive engagement and identity exploration around an academic content. How? I'm supposed to show you. So how do we go about doing this? The way we are doing this is we collaborate with educators on a particular content and lesson or unit to design activities, to design this approach, to design activities that apply the four principles in their educational context. The first step is how can you promote among the students the perception that the content that you are trying to teach has self-relevance. Once this is established, we work with the educator to think what kind of an activity would have students engage in perception that, wait a minute, some of the self-relevance can be questioned. We then challenge the teacher to think, will they feel safe in engaging in this questioning? And when we talk about the teacher, when we work with the teacher, we have them pay attention to the balancing of the identity trigger and the sense of safety. If both of them are low, there's not going to be exploration. If they're well balanced, there is motivation to explore, and there's a sense of safety, there's going to be constructive exploration. When they're out of balance, when there's too much sense of difference and not feeling safe, they're not necessarily going to explore, they're going to feel anxious. When there's too little trigger of exploration, the exploration is going to be limited or even going to be poor. Once this sense of balance between the various principles is established, what kind of an activity scaffolds exploration? Unfortunately, I don't have time to describe to you the interventions that we engage in. We'll give you question and answers. Thank you very much.